Our first guest that will, well, let me announce the whole lineup for tonight first. We have the first person we have is William L. Ingram. He has a memoir he's going to talk about. The second person is Nicole Davis. She has a book about discrimination in the Christian church against women, gender bias. So that should be an interesting conversation. Jackie Abram, her book is about workplace discrimination. And I believe it's what she personally experienced and wrote a book about. And then for our final guest, we have Vanessa Riley, who's a best-selling historical fiction romance author. So we'll bring on William Ingram. And while he's coming on, William was scheduled for a previous show. And I forgot the date. I think it was in November. But he had a bout of shingles and he thought it would be resolved and it wasn't. So he had to reschedule, and we're he was able to come on, and also glad that he's over the shingles. So can you unmute your mic, William? Or is that a
Yes, I
picture?
can. Can you
Okay,
hear me now?
that's not you, that's a photo.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. What happened? Let me do. What do I have to do?
You have to just turn your camera on. Click where it says start video.
Let me see.
It should be at the bottom next to mute.
Start video.
There
There
we
I am.
are.
Oh my
There you
goodness.
are.
That's pretty scary. Yeah, I heard the tail end of that. You were just explaining about this shingles thing. Yeah, I'm almost over it.
Oh, are you still dealing with it? You know, I've had it
Yes.
twice. It's a horrible thing. If for people who don't have it or never got it, count your lucky stars, count your blessings.
I
It's a
tell you,
horrible thing. I didn't have it on my face, so and you said you have it in your face, and I know that's really, really because a
yeah,
lot of
this,
times it affects the vision and the eyes, and but I have mine on my torso, my left torso,
hmm
and it's horrible. But mine is triggered by an allergic reaction. Because I
Oh,
had never had allergic reactions before, but you know, as you get older, then things start happening to you. So I developed an allergy to acidic foods, orange juice, cranberry juice, pomegranate
hmm
juice, and I had never had any food allergies in my entire life. But when I had the allergic reaction to that, then after that started clearing up, the shingles kicked in, and it happened to me twice. So I mean, you just never know. So how
you're
are you
right.
feeling now? How are you feeling?
I'm doing pretty good. The last week has been better than it has been. Um, you just have to take it easy. The doctor just said, just let your body heal itself. Um, I'm in my I'm in my third month. This was the shingles in the left eye, and it can take up
Oh,
to 6 months, and some people go longer than that, a year or so. You still have tenderness in your scalp, and I actually have a discoloration on the left side of my face from where it is, and the eye still itches. I'm still on medication, so as I mentioned to my wife earlier tonight, it'll be interesting when I start to get off of the meds and see where how painful it really still is. But doing much better than at the worst. And if you saw some of the pictures, you'd say, "Oh my goodness, yes."
oh, I do understand. I never had it on my face, but
Uh,
mine only lasted about 10 days, which was
yeah,
horrific. I can't imagine dealing with it for
it's miserable. I would not wish it
yeah.
on my worst enemy. I don't think, you know.
Yeah, me too.
So
I'm the same. I wouldn't wish
yeah,
on my
Learning
worst.
something new because I never knew that shingles could last that long. And
I
then
know. I didn't know either, you know. And I've had people that have said they've gone out and gotten a shingles shot now.
Yes.
Uh,
Hmm.
Once you get over 50, it's this thing. And I had gotten the first shot. I hadn't gotten the second one.
Right.
So
It's
I
a
was just going to
two-part
get the
shot.
second. Yes. And when COVID hit, the pharmacies were doing other things, and I was just uh, not able to go and get the second shot. And now, boy, I have paid for it. Uh, People everywhere were praying for me. Um, and, you know, what doesn't kill you, I guess, makes you stronger. But I tell you, that's the only thing that probably kept me strong enough to deal with it.
right.
I learned a lot too. What happens, and then we'll get off the subject. What happens with the shingles after you have the actual shingles attack? With this, in my case, is they have something called post herpetic neuralgia, and that's because shingles is still related to, as you know, chickenpox and herpes. It's all the same kind of virus,
Hmm.
and so they call it post heretic neuralgia, and it's just when the nerves are all been destroyed or disrupted by the shingles going through them, and that's the problem. The nerve pain is really tough to deal with, and you can only take so many medicines, and with a virus, you can only take so much to help with the viruses too. There's only
Right,
three or four
right.
things, so
Right.
it's a challenge. I
So,
even tried. I even got a picture of me. I did acupuncture. A couple of visits
oh,
with acupuncture too. So
did it
I
help?
tried everything. I thought it might have the first time, but the second time it was very painful, so I just canceled it. But the best
Well,
thing is just
when
rest
you
as
have
much as
those
possible.
shingles, you're pretty much willing to try anything because
Right.
Exactly.
it hurts so bad.
It does.
Um,
It does. It
and when you
dominates your
have,
life.
then did you have it anywhere else but your eye?
It came right up my back, across my scalp, and down into my eye. So I have it all
Oh,
the whole scalp on the left side of my face was hideous.
oh,
Well, we
Yeah,
wow.
definitely
Gwen.
should be keeping you
I
in our.
should send you some pictures. I got your email address. I'll send you some pictures.
Okay. I didn't take any pictures because I was hurting so bad. I just wanted to just not move.
Oh,
But anyway, and some of our people who are listening are saying that the shingles is painful. But we want to talk about your book, William,
Right.
and
yes.
that's why you're really on. But maybe it might have helped some people who have had shingles or to keep from getting it.
Yes.
Um, just
That's a positive thing.
yeah,
That may
it's
be
a
the next
positive
book.
thing. Yeah, it may be
Good.
tips for coping when you have it. It's
Yeah.
horrible.
Yes.
And so your book is called Finding Heaven in the Dark, and it's a memoir about life's meaning. And I was reading about some of the synopsis, and you were saying that you were a rebellious young man and you were on the wrong path, and something made you correct your journey and get on the right path. So just describe a little bit about, because a lot of teenagers go through the rebellion period where they kind of reject the status quo or think they know more than their parents or some combination.
Mhm.
And
That's the same thing.
True enough. True
yeah,
enough.
so
Yeah.
what just tell us a little bit about your path and what happened.
All right. Part of my story, part of the things I quote or I write down is that my name was William L. Ingram, but that's not the name I grew up with. But that's the name that was on my birth certificate. And that's significant because for the first, I'd say 14, 15 years of my life, I grew up under a different name. My mother had me in what it was called at the time uh, as an unwed mother in New York. And I never knew my birth father, which is the case with a lot of people, not just African Americans, but it just happened to
Mhm.
be that case. This was just 1949. And she never told me that my stepfather, she married a man, a Jamaican, when I was 2 years old.
Mhm.
And they proceeded to have other children. But she never told me that my name wasn't the name that we grew up with, which was Rose, and Rose. And we lived in Hartford, Connecticut. And so I grew up with that name. And I always sensed that something was wrong, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. My stepfather wasn't mean to us or anything, but he was disconnected from the family.
Mhm.
And they had different cultures. Both of them were proud and smart, um, but they had a stormy relationship. Um, and he was hungry to stay in his culture, and he stayed down at the West Indian Club and things as often as possible. My mother had been a proud black woman. She had been educated and just had happened to have me early on, a few years after her father had passed away. So her and her mother clashed. And I grew up under that kind of um, dysfunctional family relationship. There were five other children that eventually came into the family, and eventually my mother and stepfather separated. Um, During that time, what I describe in the book is how I grew up very introversial at first. And then, to make a long story short, I ended up discovering a clarinet that my uncle had one of our visits down to my grandmother's in New Rochelle, New York. As you know, with a lot of families, especially the Black African American families, the grandmothers were the one that held things together. My grandmother came from a family of 10, and her sister were the rocks of the family. So that held everybody in place, and they were our gravity. So we went down there, and I happened to discover this clarinet, and I started playing it, and that gave me a little confidence. And then I started to come out of my shell. But I still had problems functioning. I was smart kid. I was sneaky though, so I wasn't rebellious in the sense that I did a lot of things overtly. I was kind of
Mhm.
covert, and I was struggling with this identity issue without knowing it. Um, and my mother had told me that when she finally had to admit to me, there was a scene I recount in the book. I had to get a work permit or get a social security card to go to work to pick tobacco at that time. They had shade tobacco that grows in Connecticut. And I told my mother about it. I needed to get my birth certificate to get my social security card. I came home and she was sitting in a chair in the living room, which was very unusual. Very hardly ever saw her sitting down, especially with at that time she probably had 5 kids, maybe before she had the sixth one. And she said, "Here," and see some papers on her lap, and I looked at it, and there was this birth certificate that said William L. Ingram. I had no idea what that was about. And she said, I thought they would have changed it, but they hadn't. That's your father. He was a saxophone player in the band. I got together with him in church, and um, and then he didn't want to have anything to do with you. And so uh, that's all she could say. I could see she was in pain, so I didn't press the issue. After being Rose all that time, growing up with a different name, I was not going to change my name at junior high school and tell my friends. I had no clue what to do. So I grabbed a baptismal certificate I had that still had the name I'd grown up with, and I took that to the Social Security office, and I got a Social Security card in that name.
Okay.
So those were the kind of things that I was wrestling with.
Was your first
I
name the
ended up
same?
going down. Uh, yes, my first name was still William,
Okay.
um, and my grandfather's name was that as well. And
Okay.
then after that, I ended up going into the. I had a friend of mine that got me. I ended up having a tough time in high school. I did all right in junior high school. Got up to be a junior in high school. Struggled with that. Didn't know what I wanted to do. Came to an end. Had with just my mother and I had fallen out more or less. Even I was still living at home. And like you say, the rebellion is not quite sure what you want to do. It's a sad time. Um, there weren't as many outreaches or any place that I could really go get any help at the time. I wish there were, but it was what it was. A guy I knew in the neighborhood came by and convinced me that we should try to join the Marine Corps together. And we ended up going down and we joined, we signed up, but when it came to, we were going to go on the buddy system. When push came to shove, he flunked the test.
Oh,
He couldn't pass the test, and I had to go in by myself. So anyway, I went in, I survived it. I went through boot camp, went through all those different things. But then my own demons started haunting me again.
hmm.
And one of the things I mentioned in the book a few times was my mother told me later on, and my grandmother, that my dad, my biological father, had died of a drug overdose. And I
Oh.
wondered if his demons were haunting me somehow, because I could see the parts of me that were like my mother, but there were parts of me that were very introversial and quiet and uh, uh, full of imagination, and I wondered if that wasn't a part of my dad that was pulling me down somewhere. And so that's where my journey really started. I ended up actually hitchhiking across the country. I decided I went through I went through the Marine Corps, got into what they call garrison duty, and then I ended up running away. I didn't know what to do. I tried to get out of the Marine Corps. I tried to get out by showing them that I enlisted in the wrong name. I was just such a confused guy. I didn't know what to do. I knew I could. I said I can't do 4 years in here, um, and I hitchhiked across the country. I write about that. That's a strange odyssey.
Wow.
But I started to. I finally ended up in Los Angeles through a series of different things, and at a rescue mission. And I was at the end of my rope, and it was a Christian rescue mission. And I started thinking about my grandmother and my family's Christian background. Of course, as kids, we had to go to church and Sunday school.
Right.
And I thought maybe, I'm just so far from God. I just don't know what's going on. So I ended up going up for the altar call and pledging my life to Jesus and that kind of thing that you do at those meetings. And you get, as they say, soup and salvation. I actually ended up staying there and ended up working there. And one of the things that I mentioned in the book is actually they invite you to the altar call. They talk to you and see if you want to be able to stay that night. Well, I was a young guy. Nobody really asked me why I was younger than most of the guys at the time. It was mostly men, all derelicts, a lot of winos and other people on the streets. And no one actually asked me, um, like I say, why I was there. But they needed some help, and they said, if you want to commit your life, or you think you could help us, you can stay overnight. So I did, and I noticed the next morning that it was my 18th birthday.
Wow.
In the
You didn't even
newspaper,
realize until you noticed it.
I said it's February 21, and I was turned 18 that day. And I prayed that maybe this was an important change in my life. And I stayed there for a while, and I discovered some other things, which I mentioned in the book. The main key of the thing that I discovered was a type of meditation, that's a Christian meditation as well, that helped me center myself, become objective to my thoughts, and see my own insanity, or as I like to call it, unsanity. I could see that how I thought differently, how I was wrong. And I quote that here in the beginning of my book now, when you look at it on the web pages. Can you imagine coming to grips, learning how to forgive your past? And I could see that I had come to hate my mother in a way that you'd never want to admit. But it was the kind of thing that she was the only parent I had that I could be angry at. Um, my stepfather was no longer with the family. And since he wasn't really committed to us, me in a blood way, I couldn't really be angry at him.
Yeah.
Um, and I even hated myself, of course. So
Mm.
I learned to set that aside, um, live in the present. Um, there were some difficulties at the mission there with some people I had to overcome. I was still a fugitive. I was still hiding out.
The
I had to
military
deal
was
with
still
that.
looking for you.
I knew they were, but I was also committed to turn myself in. When I really came to grips and decided, knew I'd done the wrong thing, and I said I had to grow up, and I was determined to go back to Camp Lejeune and turn myself in. And the book recounts my adventures of trying to get to that objective. Um, and a couple of mishaps that happened before I finally did that. But I was able to do it. And I also recount a lot of the people like the historical background that I placed in the book, because this was during the 60s. This was during the same time that Martin Luther King was assassinated, shortly after JFK, when I recounted that when I was home from school that day. Um, and then I was living in California, listening to the radio when Robert Kennedy was assassinated. There were riots. There was a lot of civil unrest, uh, uh, racial disturbances, and things like that. So when I came back to the Marine Corps, it had changed significantly from when I was first in there. We're talking 3 years later. And so I talk about that. Um, and I did a little time in the brig. I
Mm.
wanted to try to make it right, but I ended up just uh, getting discharged. And that's kind of where the book ends. I ended up coming home, completing that circle, um,
Okay.
seeing my family again, and all those kind of things. So it was a complete journey, but I like to say I wish there was no darkness that's greater than the light. And I just discovered the Christian light that saved my life,
Yeah.
turned my head around, and gave me what I call I had a wrong life view at the time.
Okay.
That's, I think, the problem with a lot of youth. We all have that at the time, and we're in conflict with our elders and our parents. And what gets us most of the time, and so often, is the hypocrisy that we see that they have, and we react to it in a negative way and judge them for it. And then we end up repeating the same behavior often. So,
Well, it sounds like you had a very impactful youth period of time for you. I mean, that just going through all of that before 18. But there are a lot of people in the African American community that have not all the parts of your story, but some parts of your story where they are born and then they didn't know that they were not um the father was not their actual biological father. I've
true.
heard that before from other
But
people.
I think the blessing in your story is what you said was that you felt a disconnect, but he wasn't cruel to you. Often, there are children who come
Mm,
from families where the parent who's not the biological parent is often cruel or abusive. And you said you didn't
Mhm.
experience that; it was just a disconnect. So
no, you're
that
right.
was a blessing.
That was and our family, we're so close. There were six of us. Like I say, I'm the oldest, but they're all my half brothers and sisters, and
Mhm.
they'll get to see this as well at some point. But we're all so close. We've lost both our parents now, but we did get close with all of them later. My mother, even my stepfather and mother, we all got together at gatherings and things, family things in the parks and at houses and different things later on. So family was still very important as it used to be, and uh, yeah, so he wasn't mean or evil to me. And you're right, that's a significant thing that I experienced. That probably kept my sanity and kept me out of serious trouble.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
And your introduction to Christianity. A lot of times that is a turning point for people if they're and some for some people it may be another faith, but I know in America, most of our the majority of people who claim a religion in America are say they're Christians. That doesn't mean they go to church or they're practicing Christians, but as Christians we are supposed to be that light to people who are lost,
Hmm.
and that's one of our charges that some of us don't practice as well as we should.
True, and that's the title of the book, "Finding Heaven in the Dark." Had a couple of different meanings for me. One thing was just as being an African American young man with dark skin. That was one thing, but also finding heaven in the dark is in the darkness that I had within me. There is a light within all of us. That's what makes us all brothers and sisters. That's
Right.
what makes us united. And when you hear the greatest prayer ever taught by Jesus, our Father, it immediately explains the difference between the connection between us and a heavenly Father, and it also explains our relationship to each other as brothers and sisters. So finding heaven in the dark is, I thought that felt really meaningful to me. And that's why I titled that. I felt so much about that. And I explain it in there in the actual meditation that I learned and the foundation that taught that. And as you mentioned, we had, of course, I had um, religious training as a kid. I'm not a big fan of what I call the cram down part of it, where they just teach all the kids to do all the stuff and say it. But it's still important for children to have um, an awareness of I think a spiritual foundation and spiritual connection in our lives, and we see that's absent today. That's what connects morality to how we act today, instead of just having some kind of social morality. Um, that's the absolute that we need in our lives, and that's missing. It wasn't taught always correctly, and that's what most of us have reacted to. Like you say, it's not just in church. It's not just in that church or this church. Of course, there's thousands of churches in different translations of the Bible,
Mm.
and all those different differences. But the key thing is to find the center within us and the truth. And I love the quote, and I use it in the meditation that I practice. It's called "Be Still and Know."
Mhm. Right, right.
And if we really think about that, and there's a few other verses that we could connect to that, but basically it's still teaching, if you get still enough and you we watch all your thoughts scattered and try to control you and pull you this way and that way,
Mhm.
eventually you get to see more of yourself. You see a light, and not an actual physical light, but you get calmer and you become objective to your thoughts, and you're able to make better decisions. And if you continue to follow that, I think it leads you in the right direction. And then there's other things that you get better choices in reading and some other things. It starts to change your life, and it did mine. I can't regret anything. That was over 50 years ago. And as another thing I'll mention real quickly, I never thought I wanted to talk about this story because, as you mentioned, it's a lot of stuff going on there.
Yeah.
And I, I didn't write this until I started it maybe when I was like in my 40s for some reason. I felt maybe there was something positive. I know it had done a positive thing for my life. And a lot of the people that knew me knew some of the story. They knew some of the personal things that I've been through, but they had no idea of everything. Even my brothers and sisters, it wasn't something that we talked about a lot. How I came to change and become who I did. But they knew there was something different about me. And so I started it. It took about 10 years. In short, I only did it like a month at a time. And even then, I didn't know if I was going to publish it after I did a manuscript. But I'm very proud of what came of it. And I ended up entering it in contests, and I won an award at
Okay.
the Florida Authors Publishers Association. I have the book here, and there's
Okay.
I
Show us the
don't know if
cover.
you can see it. Here's the cover. I
Okay.
don't know if I get a good picture of it. I got a thing
No,
there.
it, right there is
Yeah.
yeah, we can
Yeah.
see it.
Okay,
Finding
that's not
Heaven
too
in the
bad.
Dark.
Yeah. And then I won the President's Book Award. Actually, I won 2 book awards, one for the cover and one for a memoir. And then I won a
Amazing.
Reader's Favorite Award. And these awards are fine. They're just validations, though, that the story was compelling and hopefully helpful. So I'd like to donate some, maybe even someday, to some prisons and some other places that might help some people that are on the wrong path. I've given books away, and we hope that this broadcast and some other things that I'm doing now will help to promote it a little bit more and give me a little more of a platform.
Okay, well, we wanted to remind people where they can get your book.
Yes.
Your name is on the screen, William Ingram, and the book
William,
Finding
William L.
Heaven,
Ingram.
William L. Ingram, Finding
Yep.
Heaven in the Dark, and it's available online at all
Yep.
the normal places, including your
Well,
website.
yeah, especially Amazon.com.
Okay, and your
Mhm.
website is your name, WilliamLingram.com.
Yes, right.
Okay,
Yep.
so
And or
that's
also findingheaveninthedark.com.
oh, okay. So you have
Yep.
both, Finding Him in the Dark.
Yep. Yep. The book has its
Well,
own website too.
that's wonderful, and we really appreciate you. You had a very compelling story.
Absolutely.
You know, everyone's life experience is different, but then there's some common threads. So, much success to you with selling your book. It's a book that I think I'm going to gift to someone. So, I will be purchasing it, and
I appreciate that.
just all the success. And I hope your shingles heal completely very soon.
Thank you, dear. I appreciate that. I from your lips to God's ear. I'm sure it's happening as we speak, but I appreciate that.
Yes,
I
yes.
appreciate it very much.
I'm
Yeah,
speaking it on you.
absolutely. Yeah, I'm about to say just
Okay,
speak it into existence.
right.
Yes,
All
exactly.
right. Thank you so much, William, for
All
being a
right.
guest on Black Authors Matter TV.
You're welcome, and it's great talking to you. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Okay. Have a good
All right.
evening.
Thanks. You do the same. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.